The studio's
Tom's got all the books around him. He's got to look smart because when he talks, it fucks up the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are those fake books like you find in those
Yes.
staging
Yeah, look at that.
stores or whatever?
No, I've read every one of these books. Dude.
Look at that.
Not those. Those are for Kleenex.
It's a Kleenex box. It looks like books. I love it.
Yes.
I like these podcast albums like this. It's behind me. On they're acoustic. They're sound absorbing material, so they help too.
What do you mean podcast album? What does that mean?
Like this today.
Crime?
That's the podcast album from This Day in Crime. That 1041. That was the podcast album cover for that.
I don't know what that means. Album. Like, I know what an album cover is. But...
You know when you look up a podcast on like Apple.
Oh no!
You see a square picture.
Yeah,
that's the album cover for the podcast.
Oh, okay.
Todd, the name of this podcast is Tom's the Dumbest Guy in the Room.
Yeah, mine is Dumbest Guy in the Room. We don't have albums or covers or anything. We're just available on YouTube.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot of like, I don't understand what that is you're talking into. Is that a microphone?
What's this thing that allows me to hear your voice in front of your face?
Yeah, right.
Were you is this where you recorded your episode with Stewart with kick this whole thing off that you guys are doing, working on documentaries, and did it all start right here in this studio?
Yeah, it definitely started right here. Just the two of us staying away from the rest of the world that was sick and getting to know him a little bit, sharing with the world the beautiful things about Stewart Huff.
So do you have that original footage of when like the spark of the whole idea hit you?
Yeah, I have the audio of it. I wasn't filming video then when I was doing podcasting, but we have the audio for sure.
Oh, okay.
It's still published. It's still on the feed.
Okay. So then that was when you wanted, because I what's interesting to me is the way this whole journey started for you guys, like of doing the building documentaries.
Yeah.
Like, you're not documentary people. You're doing a podcast. You'd come off of working at Barstool or whatever, or working with Pat McAfee, and you're kind of doing your own thing, doing a podcast, and then you bring in Stewart because you're a comic and you're a former owner of a comedy club, and you just like the way he did stand-up. And you were already struck by that he does it differently than everybody else. Is that my recollection?
Totally. Two things. Number one, I just now realized that we're actually recording. So
how'd you realize that?
I just finally caught on that. These sound somewhat like formal questions that you would do it in.
No. I'm not. I have no formal questions, but I realize, and I don't even. We're always recording or never recording. I don't even know. We don't even know if we started.
Okay, I don't know. Sometimes you come on and the producers adjusting levels, so the host just talks for a little bit behind. I was like, oh no, I think we're actually going. So number two, now that I'm on board, yeah, definitely. I was a fan of Stewart to start off. I was among
like all
other comics. Yeah, like all my peers, including people that were my mentors, all loved and admired Stewart's stand-up. And
why?
Stewart was attainable. That's what was weird. As far as a comedian who I felt the most distance from, as like, man, I may never get to that level. He was also the most attainable of anyone that I viewed that way. I mean, he was playing same venues that I was featuring at. He was headlining them at that time, and he would come to the club that I was partial owner of, and hang out. And he was just the comic's favorite. And you would just sit there and kind of admire the guy. And I was older, so I had some life shit that I think Stewart and I could bond over. Like, I get it. I had a kid. Same way with you when I first met you, Tom. When I started comedy, I was 38. So I could bond with the headliners a little easier than a lot of the open micers because I was a real adult.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that it was easy to become a friend of Stewart, I guess is my point, even though I was such a fan. But you know what sticks out about Stewart, and I think everybody has a similar story if they're a fan of Stewart, is this is from a non-comedy perspective. This is from outside a comedian's perspective, is he is like a preacher on a pulpit. You know, I got a grand message to deliver, yet there's still big laughs built in. So it does work as comedy, but you're like, am I watching comedy or am I watching some one-man show or just, you know, a like great orator?
Normally one-man shows, you think of whoever, I'm not even going to name their name, but they're great at it. But there's also there's a pretentiousness of my show, right?
Yes.
And Stewart's more like he just got out of the car, walks up on stage and is like, I got a question. Why does humanity do this? And then he talks about that for an hour and makes you go, that's a crazy story, or that's a great joke, or wow, that philosophy or play on words right there. All that stuff that you're talking about just starts jumping out.
It's a great way to put it, because I never was a fan of one person shows, even though like I did like some of Whoopi Goldberg stuff at one time, and Titus. John Leguizamo.
Oh,
yeah. John Lithgow. Yeah. I did like Third Rock from the Sun, but I will say when you see Stewart do it, it creeps up on you. You're like about a quarter of the way through. You're like, God damn it. I'm in the middle of a one-man show and I'm at the fucking Moose Lodge. Like, how is this possible?
Right.
Like, why is this guy here at this Moose Lodge in Kokomo, Indiana, doing what he's doing? So from an inside comedy perspective, I will say Stewart shouldn't exist as he is. Like, he's the only person occupying the space.
Agreed.
He's the
audiences everywhere agree. So now you have him on because of that, because that struck you and you want to know, like, well, how does he do this? Right. And then
I want to know what makes this weirdo tick.
Right. And at the time, was he working on God Hates Ann, or was God Hates Ann done, that show? Because I did that show with him when we did Sick of Stupid, and I went around and I would watch how the crowds reacted and how they connected to it, and like you could see people were like, no. Like you don't really see that in comedy either. Like people leaving the crowd and be like, they're not only was that was funny, they're like, it affected me, it profoundly touched me or reached me, and you never see that. So I was amazed. And was he doing that show at the time, and that's why you got on to God Hates Ann?
No, it had been a few years, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Stewart, but you know, at that point in time, he was putting out a new hour every year. So we might have been 4 specials back to get the God Hates Ann. It was just one of my favorite bits of his.
And it didn't even make it didn't even make the end of the show, really. It was added on. It wasn't even right. It wasn't even ended up being the really part of the show.
The actual Ann Hodges bit.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it was that show. By the way, it was very nice. All that stuff you said, very nice. But it was hard to just sit here.
It's like listening to your own eulogy.
Yeah.
Imagine being where I am. Oh my God!
I know.
Not one mention. I mean, I do comedy too, Todd. Jesus. Okay. so it ends up not even making.
By the way, I have to pay respect to what you've been doing since you've been writing for the Miss Pass show at Laughing Skull. Those clips and that shit you're working on. I want to say brand new Tom Simmons, but it's a version of Tom Simmons I very much like. Okay. I don't know what's happening to your brain, but you're on fire. You're always one of my favorite comedians, but you're just there working out shit in a gym. Like I can tell it's the first time you maybe told that, and you're on fire right now. So there you go.
I appreciate that.
Equal playing field.
Yeah. Well, I got an editor that'll cut it.
You're on fire.
Over and over and over again.
You're on fire.
The stuff with Stewart took too long. We're just going to go straight to
cut
Tom's
to the loop. We'll cut right
fluff.
to here. So he's on your podcast. You're talking to him about God Hates Ann, which is interesting a story to me because I know it too, which is the story of Ann Hodges and the whatever. He can tell it. But
you're on fire right
what
now.
Interested me about it was like how Stewart, the story of Ann Hodges and the meteorite that comes down and bounces and hits her. Not only is it a hilarious bit, but you went to the town, right? That's what struck you about it too. Like he went to the town and did all the research and like, why would you do all that?
I don't know. It sounded fun.
Okay. So that's what struck
shop.
him. Yeah.
I'm in a junk shop. This is way before Todd and I were on this podcast. Couple of years, and I'm in a junk shop, and Life? I think it was Life. I like flipping through old magazines when you're in a junk shop and There's a Newsweek from 1971. And I just flipped through it. It's kind of cool looking, the ads and everything. And sometimes you run into really weird stories in there. And there was a Life magazine from 1954. A woman, only confirmed human being ever hit by a meteorite. Confirmed. There are rumors and stories. But so I read the article and I'm like, that's fascinating. And it happens in Sylacauga, Alabama. And I'm like, I live in Georgia. And I look at, it's like 3 hours from me. So I got my car and drove over there. And
wouldn't you think, like, I'll check the internet for the stories first? You're like, I need to go to the spot, and then it's from 50 years ago, and then it'll be I can find the story?
I mean, that's the thing. Look, I am old, so it's going to sound old. So it's going to be balanced because I am old. But I believe that if you're there, where it happened, and you're talking to people eyeball to eyeball, and it's a whole nother thing. The internet cannot give you that stuff. The internet can give you the facts, so I got a hotel room, and I went to the diner, and I just, hey, you know about this Ann Hodges? I don't know. Yeah, I can't remember some crap about that big rock hit a woman, and I don't know. I was just messing around, and I enjoyed it. I spent like 2 or 3 days there just talking to people, and then I left. And then I'm started writing that bit, creating that piece of comedy, And then so Todd and I were on his podcast, and we were literally swapping, if I remember correctly, Todd, we're literally swapping because we both like weird stories from history. He's telling me one, I'm telling him one. We're back and forth like tennis players, just talking weird history. And then Todd said, tell me the story about Ann Hodges. So I tell him the story. So then he says, I think on the episode, on the podcast, Todd says, you're like you should make documentaries. And I'm like, I don't have any money. What are you talking about?
Right.
And so then after we wrapped that episode, Todd and I are just hanging out, and he's got this really cool backyard with a bar and everything in it and all this, and we're just hanging out. And we start talking seriously about, wonder how much it would cost to make a documentary. It's COVID. And Todd's the one that was like, come on. And I was like, buddy, I'm in. I've got no money. So however we need to find this money, but I'm ready.
And then from there, right when that happened, I don't listen to podcasts. I don't ever listen to podcasts. I don't have any podcast, I don't know how many times I can say it. But I feel like from there, had my own personal podcast for 2 years as this story developed, right? Because you called me and said, we're going to make a podcast, Todd and I, and we're going to do a documentary. We're going to make a documentary about Ann Hodges. We're going to go there and film this thing, right? And then I talked to Todd, and Todd goes, I'm going to make a documentary about Stewart Huff and his curiosity and how that's crazy and leads him there, and why do we have this person named Stewart Huff, and what drives a mind to think that way? And he says, but don't tell him that. He thinks we're doing it on this.
Yeah, I totally lied to me.
That's what was odd about it, right? Like, from my chair, he was telling me, and to put in context for the listener, like, the story of Ann Hodges is a woman in Sylacauga, Alabama, that got hit while napping on her couch in her house at 2:00 in the afternoon by a meteorite that ripped through her roof, like a meteorite the size of a football. And when I found out that he actually went there and stayed for 2 or 3 days, so that he could smell and feel and touch and see the people that are there now, to get a sense of what was going on then, I'm like, all right, nobody does that in comedy. First of all, we all Google, we get what we can get from Google, and then we fill in the blanks ourselves with our own comedy savvy, right? So I was like, this is different. And I got a real sense, the more and more we talked about it, was he went there, in addition to what he said, he's my age. So it's not an age thing why he doesn't use social media. I use the shit out of social media. But he went there because he could not go there. Like, he was compelled to go there and see what this place looked like. And that's what fascinated me, because in the midst of him telling that, within this bigger question I'd asked about his road routine, his ritual of when wakes up in the hotel before he goes to the show, he fills that time with shopping at junk shops. And every now and then something grabs him emotionally that he sees there, and he buys it and he takes it home and he studies it. And sometimes he drives to where it originated or where it came from. And then he gets home and then he takes that story to stage so that he can share some grand message related to it or within it to everyone in the world, everyone in the Midwest, wherever he's at that weekend. So I was like, this is different. Nobody else does this. This might be the reason I was so gravitated toward him as a comedian. And now that he's my friend, I think I got a real opportunity here to talk him into going and researching that story more thoroughly with the camera crew. And what he won't know is I'm also going to be studying him and how his comedy process works. So and that's when I called
so cool.
you.
Yes. And then it was interesting to hear how it was going from both of you from different perspectives. And then at some point you told him what led to you telling him, or how did you fight telling him, or did it just feel right at that moment? All right, I need to tell him this. Or were you worried that he was going to be like, no? Because that's another thing about you, Stewart, is you don't want it to be about you. That annoys you.
Well, I'd rather the project be good.
Right. Right. So you'd have been less excited about doing it if it would have been about you than if it was about the idea.
Yes.
So why did you have to tell him?
Once we got to a point where we had filmed the greater chunk of it, I was like, okay, keeping this a secret isn't as vital as it was before. I kept it from him so that it didn't affect how he conducted his interviews with people and just how he behaved down there. I didn't want it in his head that, God damn it, you know how he is. Like, God damn it, that they're fucking going to spend too much time on me. I just want to look into the story. I just want to talk to people. He really could have cared less if any of the cameras were turned on, to be honest. That was me. Right. Like, I made sure the cameras were on. He could care less if we would have went down there, the two of us, with a notebook and pen. I mean, he would have been just as pleased.
And then the story became not Ann Hodges, right? It became another story, and it was like, oh, this is very interesting, and that it falls into what you were talking about him just following his curiosity, and it ends up leading to some other weird, wonderful place,
Yeah, it really just became about the experience I was having with Stewart Huff, this friend, this comedian that I consider one of the best in the game. Getting to ride shotgun with him in this town where all kinds of crazy shit was happening, and watching him experience it and how he handles it. And then to even see, eventually at some point we ran out of money and this whole thing got put on pause before it could be edited. So it's just sitting in limbo. And in the meantime, he starts writing bits about other peripheral shit that we were experiencing while we were there. And I'm like, this is it. He, another comedian, Dana Gold, told me one time when I was a young comedian that your only job as a comedian is to go live life and report. It's your only job. And he was doing that. He was just doing it at the most authentic, complex level of that. Like, he actually was getting in his car and driving to places, talking to people, and he does it all the time. You ever travel with this guy in separate cars? Like, you'll leave one destination that's an hour away to where you need to go next, and you leave at the exact same time, and he may show up 2 hours later, and no phone call, no text or nothing. And at first you're like, God damn this guy. But after a while, you just learn to accept and love the fact that shit, he probably saw some funny graffiti on a billboard and pulled off the exit and started tracking down with the farmer who owns the land where the billboard is about, who put that piece of graffiti up there and what the hell it means.
Sense. Is that true?
Yes.
I rode with you. I drove to Canada and around Canada with you. We never stopped once, except at like a Cracker
You were
Barrel.
in the car with me.
Oh, so the interesting thing was with you already.
Well, I mean, I'm not.
The sigh Stewart just gave was the best part of that.
I hate to. That was me taking the words out of his mouth.
Tom, we were down there working like on a schedule. You know, I was a little bit anal with the schedule going back. I would have been a little looser because I didn't fully understand Stewart yet. But we're literally going 25 minutes from point A to point B. We show up. He has the keys, by the way, to the damn Airbnb. So for like 2 hours, we can't get into the place. It's like 127 degrees. So we're just out there sweating, can't get into the Airbnb. And come to find out, finally, he pulls in the driveway and we're like, where in the hell you been? He saw along that highway, the same thing we saw and Pat, but we just like, oh, look at that. And just kept driving because we had a schedule to uphold. He saw it. It was a snowman made of car tires with some other shit on it, like automotive components to fill in the rest of the snowman. Pulls off the road immediately, probably almost causes a 7-car pileup, and goes to the house that's there in the little scrapyard motor parts business and just gets to the bottom of how that snowman came to be and when and why.
Is that true?
And who did it?
That is true, and I feel guilty about it.
Why?
Because they were waiting. This is the reason.
How hot could it have been? The snowman didn't melt.
It's made out of tires.
Made out of tires.
Oh, still.
They were waiting, and I felt so guilty. I mean, I saw it's a stack of tires that they had made to look like a snowman, and they did a damn good job. And they had automobile parts and stuff on it and all this stuff. And so I had to do a U-turn and then go back and check it out. And they painted the inside of the tires. So the tires are white on the outside, but they painted white on the inside too. And then I thought, these aren't white tires. I mean, they painted. That's how intricate this thing was. It was gorgeous. It was really.
What's the fascination with it? Is it the thought that someone had to put that together? Is it the time that they invested? Is it all of that?
Well, first of all, I think the thought interests me. People have thoughts all the time, like, oh, it would be really cool to build a giant praying mantis out of the scrap metal.
Right.
And then very few people actually go, all right, let's go do it.
Execution.
Right. So, you're talking about a very small percentage of people that go, okay, yeah, let's go. Come on. Let's build.
You want to
this
meet
praying
that person.
Yeah. I want to meet the person that actually has the thought and goes, okay, turn the TV off. We're going to go do this. You know what I mean? And then the person that makes the praying mantis to a level that you're like, damn, that's impressive. They didn't just throw this thing together and just be like, look at what I made. Painting the inside of the tires, what's the point of that? This is somebody that put some dedication.
Yeah, see that
Steve Jobs of snowman tires.
the level of detail that goes into them painting the inside of the tire, but also the level of detail in you recognizing that they painted the inside of that tire. I promise if 100 people pulled over and asked them about that snowman, nobody was like, why did you paint the inside? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. And
Exactly.
But I got to be honest, Todd, I don't think we ever talked about this. There are two things that I feel really, really guilty about Alabama. And one is that, because I got back in my car and realized, oh, shit, I just talked to this guy that built the snowman for like an hour and 40 minutes. And then I realized I had the keys. Oh, God. And I was speeding going back to the Airbnb. I was thinking, oh, it's such a dick move,
Yeah.
But this is why it's beautiful, guys, and I don't even know, to be honest with you, I don't even think I even asked him what the guy's story was, but here's the potential of what happens. And this is a similar scenario, even though I'm making it up in my head right now, of things that happens when he does something like this. And this is why you have to allow it and you have to love it and you can't get pissed off about it because he's the only guy in the world that does shit like this. But sometimes he will stop for something like that. And he'll talk to the guy who actually made it. And he'll find out in the course of talking to the guy, the reason he built a snowman is, in that part of Alabama, you don't get snow. You don't get to make a snowman. But he's from Minnesota. And he misses very much when he was a kid making a snowman. And maybe even when he was a father, making a snowman with his son. But then his son died in a horrible car accident. And he had to leave. He had to reboot his life and leave there. And he moved to nowhere, Alabama. And he wasn't a religious guy, but now he's discovered religion and he becomes a preacher of this church that is embracing black members as far back as the 70s when other white churches weren't, or whatever in the hell. He will sometimes leave with a story like that, all because he pulled over because of some cool looking snowman on the side of the road made of auto parts. And then those are the stories that sometimes make it to stage. And they're good examples of how humans now can learn from little bitty things like that, how to better their lives and learn from this guy's story, all because he didn't give a fuck about meeting us on time with the keys to the Airbnb and more about this fucking tire snowman. But it's beautiful. Who else uncovers shit that way? He does.
That's right. That's true. That's what makes you unique.
I mean, that's a good compliment. But I will. That's what you don't get on the internet.
Right.
You're not going to get that on the internet.
But if you would have, I wouldn't be standing out here in the fucking 137-degree heat for an hour and a half. All you had to do was Google, somebody else has been there. You know what I mean? They'll tell you all about it.
That's the sacrifice of.
That's true.
Do you consider yourself an artist, Stewart? Or is that word still taboo to you as a comedian?
No, I think comedy is an art form. I don't think there's very many artists practicing it.
Right.
But
why'd you look directly at me when you said that?
Oh. We were all thinking it. So
I want to get back to back on track to where you guys are making this documentary, and you have to tell. So we're
in Alabama,
and then so you. At some point, like, you got to be like, oh, this isn't the story we came here. We're supposed to be doing Ann Hodge, and now I got this angle and this angle. And I know you're in the moment creatively happy and inspired by all these other things that start happening, but you're also there to make a documentary about Ann Hodge. And is that part of why you had to tell him that it was bigger than that, so that you could continue to explore these cool things that he's exploring and not have to go backwards to do Ann Hodge, which you ended up doing anyway, right?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Stewart, but I think I told you at the point where we needed to start to organize our footage and come up with a roadmap of what this feature film was going to look like. So we needed to put things in certain orders and then fill in the blanks with maybe scenes we hadn't filmed yet. So in order to tell that story, we had to share the vision of what the story was going to be. So that's when I was like, hey,
were you worried?
This is what I was thinking.
Were you worried when you were going to tell him?
Yeah, I didn't want him to get pissed off and say, well, fuck it, I'm done then. You make whatever you want to make. Like, cause he's that sensitive about what he would consider bragging or something. And again, it's not a compliment. Like I was telling him a few nights ago, like, any of these things I say about you, it's not necessarily a compliment. It just so happens that you are great at what you do and you have fans. But it's just that you're one of a kind. I don't know how else to put it. So it's fucking got me hooked. Like I want to exploit it and share it because you're the only person.
Well, like you have it. You have it because just in your curiosity with him and how he gets to the bottom of how he writes and blah, 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 999 out of 1,000 comics will watch him and be like, it's a little too preachy for me, or well, it's too whatever, or they'll be, I wish I could write like that. They don't ever go like, how does he do this?
Yes, Stewart
ask those questions. So
Stewart is your tire snowman.
Yeah. Yes. So you're doing it too.
Yeah, like it's really opened up for me. Go ahead, Stewart.
I think Todd is very curious. I think Todd has that curiosity in him. And we've been working together on different projects for 2.5 years. And he is driven by curiosity. He wants answers, and he creates the question, and then he wants the answer.
Now, did you have that? Because you were a police officer for a long time and a detective, and so that's one of your passions, right? Your podcast is it true crime, or is it? I don't even know. So
yeah.
Did that curiosity and that follow it to the end develop as you were a cop, or did it start before that? And then, does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think it definitely helped being a cop. I just didn't know what it really was, right? So in the same way, when I was a younger person, I didn't know what stand-up comedy really was or how you would go about doing that. I just knew that I had kind of this innate thing in me that gravitated me towards stand-up. Now, same way with Stewart, there was something really drawing me to him. And I think what I was identifying is he had something that I also had in me. I just didn't really know how to use it. Like, he truly makes curiosity like his compass, his life's compass. Like, he follows that needle. Wherever curiosity points him, that's where he's headed. And I, even though I was a curious person, I would lazy it a little bit, right? And thanks to technology, I could look stuff up on my phone, and then, oh, okay, that would give me enough to satisfy my curiosity. It's not enough anymore, because now I see what happens when you physically go there and you chase it down and you try to touch it and see it and smell it. And what happens is you uncover shit that you wouldn't otherwise.
Right. So
now
that's what happened to you
I've
guys.
got that bug.
So that's what happened to you
Yeah.
guys when you were there. Like I said, it was my own personal podcast that I was listening to. Like, you guys get there, you're starting to interview about Ann Hodge, and then you meet this crazy mayor, and then 10 other people that have great stories, and you're like, and now you're off on this angle, and then it's not even the story anymore, but you're still tracking some stuff down with the Natural Science Museum or whatever, NASA, like, to talk about the meteor, and you're still doing some of that, but this other stories are totally developing. And then that one gets put on the side, and then it circles back around to that, and then he's joining a cult, and like, what is happening here? Like, all these,
Right.
and then but then you can't sell that, right? It's like when you try to go pitch that as an idea to podcast companies or documentary makers, they don't care about Stewart's curiosity at all, right? They're like, what's the story? And then through that,
I
you
would
start putting
think-
that aside, and then you stumble across an even crazier story. And now and then because you have the Star Wars of true crime stories in your pocket, which they can't talk about because they're in the process of selling that, right? Now you have this, and now they're circling back to, what other ideas do you got, right? And now they're like, oh, wait a minute, that's a great idea. Something they wouldn't even look at last year. Now that you have this other thing, now they're like, oh, we want to look into this, right?
Yep, pretty much. I mean, it was a podcast company who also was kind of in the middle of this whole thing, you know, when we were trying to decide who to partner with on the other documentary. This came up in just a meeting, just casual bullshit conversation, when I was describing Stewart to them, basically. And they were like, you guys did what and what? And then they looked up the God Hates Ann bit. They watched it. They ended up watching the whole hour that was filmed surrounding it. We're like, oh, now we see what you're talking about. Like, they immediately fell in love with his comedy, and then therefore fell in love with the thought of this journey that we took in Sylacauga, and how it just ended up going from one story being researched, to just this series of stories being uncovered and interesting people that we met, and just crazy things that happen when you go and do this thing with a person like Stewart in an interesting place of the world. You can't maybe find this at every town, but I would argue, as Stewart always does, pretty much every small town's got stories. Mm-hmm. And it basically became that, and they got it. They recognized right away, oh, that's something that we would like to hear. We've not really heard a podcast like that. So now the plan is to take what we've recorded and then record some additional stuff over the course of a week or so, and put it together as a long form podcast with this company who puts out big production stuff. So it's going to be interesting to go from that to this. But what we learned from the documentary world, don't you think this is true, Stewart? From what we've learned so much in 2 years with the other one, that probably God Hates Ann as a documentary would be something we would have to completely fund ourselves. That means probably film some more stuff, get it back to editing. So probably another 25, 30 grand, maybe 40 would have to go into that. And then it would just have to be submitted to festivals, and then hope somebody fell in love with it at a festival in order for it to ever get distributed.
Right. But if
that's the case.
Once it's a podcast, can it go the other way, where it's like, you show that it works as a podcast, and you're like, we have all this footage, and all we got to do is go shoot more, and we got this whole thing as a documentary. But
I would hope so, right? Because we do have a good bit of it shot. So that would be cool. I never even thought about that. But if it were to garner enough attention as a podcast, it's something that could be done. Or we even thought about making it kind of a different looking comedy special, because he's had a lot of comedy result from that experience.
Yeah.
So who knows?
I mean, the reality is Hollywood is not art. Hollywood is capitalism. That's the reason it exists. They can overlap. You know, you can have an artistic script that is layered and interesting and all that and sellable. And you have an amazing movie or an amazing documentary or whatever. But if it's not sellable, they don't give a shit how artistic it is.
That's what I mean about Let's God Hates Ann proves that, right? Like, you have this thing, and now that you show you have this other idea.
If you can, if a podcast company says, hey, we like this, we want to do it, and then Todd and I do it, and then some other person sees it and goes, I think I can make money on this. You know, it's essentially what you're doing with any project is you're trying to prove to someone with money that I can make you more money. That's what you're trying to do.
How do you get Stewart in meetings with Hollywood and people that you guys have? How do you get him to not slam his hands down and walk out of the room all the time? Like,
I've been great.
Really?
It turns out
he's been better than me.
Yeah.
It turns out that when I'm not selling myself, then I can sell something else. I can sell something I believe in. I just can't sell myself.
Why is that?
Because he doesn't believe in himself.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, right? I think there's probably something a little bit deeper there.
Yeah.
Any idea what that is?
I don't.
He has no interest in commercializing himself.
Yeah, I mean, because I relate in some ways, and so I'm curious on your take on that.
I have no interest in. I think that's a very good way to put it. I have no interest in commercializing myself. I don't feel like I'm a commodity. And if someone came along and said, boy, I really love what you do, and they got what I do or what I'm trying to do, and then they said, then I would be all on board.
Is it the idea of having to sell yourself, or is there any piece of you that feels fraudulent as far as what other people view you as, or is it just the selling?
I think it's more like, I haven't thought about this that much. I think it's more like there's part of selling something that is bullshit. You're lying. I mean, even when you're not 100% lying, you're lying a little. And I can't do that.
Is that why you don't like
myself.
social media? Does
Yeah,
it
I
feel
don't.
that
Social
same
media,
way?
social media does not make me happy. It makes me sad.
Same.
So I'm not interested in it. And I don't really want anybody that I know to come to my shows. So, you know, it produces a negative result. If social media works for me and people go, oh my God, Stewart's there, then that's not the result I want. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
I think one of the
there is a game you have to play in that world, right?
Yes.
There's definitely a game that you play. And like, I came from Barstool Sports and the Pat McAfee show before I started doing this stuff. And, you know, you find yourself when you're with someone like that and you have a lot of eyes on you, fulfilling an or a non-accurate depiction of yourself. It's based on you. It's inspired by the real story of Todd McComas, but it's a little bit cartoonish. And you end up that audience decides what role you fill in that group. They called me Uncle Todd. I was the old, you know, grizzled veteran who was a cop for a long time, and they expected certain things out of me. And I was an exaggerated form of myself that really highlighted those things that they held on to. And Stewart could not do that. Like
that's
he's
very,
like,
very hard
this is
for
bullshit.
me. But you know, when Todd and I, after this Alabama thing, we stumbled upon this story that's a true crime story, and I started asking Todd curious questions, because I don't know anything about the true crime world. He was he's a retired cop, he's a retired detective, and he's into true crime. And him and I both started asking curious questions about what about this and what about that, and then So and then we began calling people. Okay, like we would literally read an article. We'd get, go on the internet and read an article from whatever, year, and it would have someone's name in it. And we would say, I wonder if we can find them. And at the beginning, it was just curiosity. That's all it was. And we would, you can find anybody, anything you want on the internet. I can find where you live. You know what I mean? So, and we would pick up the phone and call people. And when Todd, who's a retired cop, would call another cop that we found in the newspaper, I constantly have to remind him, tell them you're a cop. He did. So Todd has similar thing, because if you're a cop and I'm a retired cop and I want to talk to you and and I don't tell you I'm a retired cop and you're like, who the hell's this dude? You know what I'm saying?
You're a civilian.
You're a civilian. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to tell you
It's
anything.
the same thing for comedians.
Exactly. If you know what I mean? So, and I have to, but Todd doesn't want to have to identify as a retired cop. That's not who he is.
Right.
He's Todd McComas.
Right.
But when you're trying to sell yourself, then there's a lie there. There's a caricature, to use the word Todd used. You know what I mean? And I don't feel comfortable doing that. If someone else sees what I do and they like it, then that's great. Otherwise, but when I'm trying to sell you or a project or something, or Todd, when Todd is going to call another cop that he doesn't know personally, then I can look at Todd and say, tell him. I mean, I don't know how many times I've written down when he's on the
Every
phone.
time.
I've written down on a piece of paper, tell them you're a cop.
Because it makes it easier for them, like, oh, okay, this guy, now I trust this guy a little bit more. And I'm
Yeah.
like, how do you not know that?
He does know that. He does know that.
I worked so long to forget about the cop part of me for a few years there. And it's like an old habit of just ignoring that part of me, because it worked better for a while in the other world. And now I find myself in a place where it's actually gives me an advantage on certain parts. Now, other people that were Stewart strength comes into reaching out to people back in the LGBTQ plus community back then and all that stuff. Like, he's way better at that because he's got this, he's kind of got a hippie persona, he's got an inner hippie that lives in there, and people recognize that when they talk to him, and those people are a little more open with him.
And he writes down, don't tell them I'm a cop.
right.
That's not far from the truth, Tom.
Yeah. I know, but because listening to you guys and I know that for my people watch it, we can't tell exactly what this story is because it's going to be made into something. So.
But Todd and I have gotten pretty good. I'll give us his compliment. When we were in Alabama, his personality, my personality, okay? And we kind of fumbled around with when you're interviewing people, strangers, people you don't know, right? So, for example, there was an adorable woman that was a retired teacher. Do you remember her, redhead, Todd? And her hands, she was going to be on camera talking about Ann Hodges in the media, right? And her hands were shaking. She was literally, her hands were shaking. And Todd, he said, Stewart, and I sat down and I talked about her hair and how beautiful it was. And we talked about her dress and all this stuff, nothing that had anything to do with anything we were interested in until I noticed her hands stopped shaking. And now she's talking. And then we worked our way around to the questions I wanted to talk about. And in that journey, you remember she said that great thing, Todd. She was talking about how she's a Christian and all this, but some of the Christians in this town are way, I forget the word she used, but way too anal is basically what she was saying. Because there was a little uprising in that town against Halloween because it's a pagan ritual.
Right.
And then she said, I am not for or against Christianity. I'm not for or against Halloween. I'm for fun. And it was just this beautiful little moment that had nothing to do with Ann Hodges or anything that came out. So anyway, my point is, I was the right person to interview her because when Todd sits down, he clicks into that cop detective. I've got 4 answers I want to find out. Let's get to it. But then we met a woman that's an attorney in Birmingham, I think it was, or Huntsville or something. And she'd been on all kinds of shows and interviews in courtrooms and everything. Todd sits down with her. Amazing interview. it was just boom, boom, question after question. She's telling stories. She's not nervous. She's, you know what I mean? So Todd and I have figured out whose personality works well with what. So, and the LGBTQ community is involved in our true crime story that we're working on. So when I need to talk to a 74-year-old gay man, then I'm the one calling.
Sometimes you need a scalpel. Sometimes you need a hacksaw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Coincidentally,
Totally. I mean,
coincidentally, that is involved in true crime
to
a
people
lot,
is
by the
all
way.
psycho. Talking to people is nothing but psychology, right? To get what the desired result, you got to know what that person needs from you and what kind of personality they attach to and feel most comfortable with. And you've got to use that to your advantage, you know, whether it's to get information out of somebody that's going to be tough to get, or just to get them to be relaxed and get the best version of them possible on camera or on microphone. So that's better for the product that you're trying to make. And, you know, when we talked about like learning what we've learned over the last 2 years, and this is not bragging at all. Tom, you're right. Like, we know this because industry people have told us this. Like, the story that we did stumble into and investigated for so long.
Can you give any outline of that at all without
let
giving
Todd
any
finish what he's saying right now,
Okay.
and then we'll run through an outline, because I think what he's saying is important. I think I know what he's saying.
And it is true crime, and it's been defined to us as a once in a generation, probably once in a 2 or 3 generation type story. So the reason we were able to learn so much so quickly was because every single person or every single studio that we pitched it to wanted it and wanted it badly. And that caught us way off guard. The only thing I can give credit to in the way of Stewart and I is early on, we stuck to our guns on the creatives, the development, they call it, where your pitch materials. So you need to get any meetings, as it turns out, you need a pitch deck, which is basically like a fancy PowerPoint, or you need and you need a sizzle reel, which is about a 2.5 minute trailer almost, that showcases what your story is going to be about, but visually. So we just stuck to our guns. We had people help us make those early on. We were like, nope, that ain't going to cut it. Nope, we don't. That doesn't knock our socks off. Why would it knock off the socks of somebody who've used 10 of these a day or more? So we spent a lot of money, thanks to Tom and other people that in our lives that helped us with that. We got real professional people in the business to help with those creatives and get those together. And once we got to a point where we're like, wow, yes, that's worth pitching, it changed everything. We went from not being able to get a meeting with anyone by just verbally trying to explain what we had, to just sending those pitch materials and getting a call back within a day or two from everyone that we sent it to saying, yes, we want a meeting. We want to learn more about this. And then by the time that meeting was done, yes, we want to make this, let's send it an offer. And we literally, had 11 studios kind of competing for this thing. And even though that was the case, still a total fucking nightmare. A total fucking nightmare, right? You would think in that scenario, when you have agents from big agencies going, I've never seen this before, right, this never happens, and it's still a fucking nightmare. Right. How hard is it when you try to take something like God Hates Ann to the table?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
God Hates Ann, the actual documentary that Todd and I were going to make, and we're still going to do it as a podcast, is not near as sellable as this true crime story that we've stumbled upon. Not even close.
I think it's been interesting too, because when you say you'd have never thought that everybody was going to love it, I've since day, to me, being the only listener to this podcast via phone calls from you guys, I have a whole time been just like, can't you just go right to the head of Netflix and talk to them? And you can't. You have to meet some bare minimums. You can't turn in a script to a television show in the wrong format. You can't, because they're looking for reasons to throw it aside as opposed to reasons to look at it. Even the agency, when you pitch the story, didn't get it. The agent didn't get it and was like, yeah, this is pretty good, until he started getting feedback from production companies for being like, yes, we want this. Yes, we want this. And meanwhile, you guys, or I'm screaming at you guys and with you guys, like, how are you not selling this as a podcast and as a movie and as a book and as a, like, that this should be the angle at all time. But until other people say we want this, they don't get off their asses somehow. Am I wrong about that?
Stewart,
No,
take
you
that
are.
one.
You are not wrong. It has been the most frustrating. At one point, actually, it's been flipped twice now. At one point, Todd called me and said, "I'm done. Okay, I'm just done. I don't want any part of any of this. What we're going to do is we're just going to make a podcast out of this thing, and I don't want to mess with Hollywood." And I had to take a deep breath and say, "Okay, we're going to be all right, buddy. Just go punch something." You know, go break your printer, go break a glass against the side of the wall or whatever, and calm. And then in last Christmas, winter, then I was at that point. I was like, okay, this is done. Nothing's going to work. This sucks so bad, blah, blah. And it's all the business. And finding somebody in Hollywood that actually does work is almost impossible.
But when it came down to it, I'm sorry, we got to wrap this up because he's giving me the sign that we got to wrap this up.
Oh, really?
I feel like we got started really.
You always make me the bad guy.
Well, you are.
All right, why do we got to wrap it up?
Time is the bad guy because we got other things to do. We got other people scheduled to come in.
Okay.
All
right, whatever.
But now I forgot what I was going to say.
We were talking about Hollywood, Netflix.
Yeah. What it came down to ultimately, right, was you ended up finding people that were willing to cut through all the bullshit and just talk to you directly and be like, what's your vision? That's our vision too.
Here's the thing. This is my opinion, and then I'm interested to hear what Todd has to say. If you have something that you think is sellable to Hollywood, whether it's whatever it is, a movie, a script, a documentary, whatever it is, you have to focus on your pitch materials, your sizzle reel. How are you presenting your project to another person who doesn't know you? That has to kick the door down. So if you have $8,000 to invest, put almost all of it into those pitch materials. You want to kick that door down to where they go, what the hell's this? And then they want to talk to you. And then you've already impressed them. That's where you want to focus. And keep your eye out for sharks, because they're going to come around. People that want money for doing nothing. They don't want to do any work whatsoever, but they want a cut of what you're going to eventually make. They are everywhere. Keep your eye out for lawyers, agents, just hangers-on, production companies. All these people are going to talk like, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to do this, this, and this. And then they won't answer an email for 12 days. And this is coming from a person who has a project that, that a dozen production companies want.
Right.
We have a successful project. They want this thing. You know what I mean? And they still treat you like shit. So you need to, if you're trying to sell something, you need to find someone who actually does what they say, which is hard to do, and then actually believes in the project, not how much money am I going to make. Money's great. I want to make money too, but you have to believe it. So far, we think we finally found a lawyer that is on our side, but we're not 100% sure yet, but we think we might have found one. We have a production company that we feel 100% comfortable with, but that took what, Todd? 4 months, 5 months? And by the way,
of you not calling them back?
What'd you say?
Of you not calling them back? Because they were one of the early readers.
We got to wrap this up, so we can't get into all that. But the thing is, like we had like 11. I think, was that the number? 11 production companies that said yes. I think that was and the reason we had 11 is because we decided we don't want to talk to any more of them.
Right.
Like we're the ones that
we could have kept going.
Yeah, we canceled.
It got to a point where we're like, clearly, okay, we had two of the biggest you could ever hope. I think the only one maybe that's of that size we didn't get to was Imagine Entertainment, Ron Howard's company. That's just because our agent didn't send the stuff like he was supposed to. But we had that size of companies that wanted it already. We're like, okay, it's just getting redundant at this point, right? We've got them all shapes and sizes, all different levels of expertise and whatnot. So our variety's there. Let's just stick with this 11 and let's hone it down. And after, several months, our initial, the first company to express real interest is the company we end up going with. And you're right, Tom, we did kind of have to put them on hold for months while we waited on another deal, and just to be able to respond to it. And that caused kind of a collision to happen where they just, because they're such great communicators, asked for a meeting and basically said, listen, this is starting to smell bad. It feels icky, is the way they put it. It feels like you're trying to fuck us over. What's going on? And what happened is they just did some really good detective work, because it turns out everybody knows everybody in Hollywood, and they had a spy of sorts in there that figured out some stuff was going on. But what they end up finding out was that wasn't us being sneaky. It was us being honest. We just were kept in the dark on a lot of things that were going on. And once we uncovered that, we just felt comfortable at that point saying, hey, for two reasons, our story lies, the heart of it lies with what then would be called the gay community within Indianapolis, now LGBTQ plus or LGBTQIA community in Indianapolis between the 70s and mid 90s. And they are the biggest voice for that community in entertainment right now, arguably. And number two, they were just so passionate and so communicative. I mean, there was never a time where we couldn't email and get a response in 15 minutes, or now a text and somebody in the middle of, like the guy who runs documentaries and that part of the creative side of this huge ass production company called us back while he was doing yoga, in the middle of yoga, like out of breath, like, and these other companies, it just became apparently aware, or painfully aware that they didn't give two fucks about Stewart and Todd.
Because it's a constant game, right? It was constant. Like we asked for 30% or 50%. We ask for this because it's the negotiation. That's you try to screw everybody and get your end. And until you guys really came across some people that was like, you can be we're going to be honest. This is what we want. This is what you want. We're not going to do this back and forth. And somehow you guys broke through all that crap and found the right people that are going to turn this project, hopefully, into something better than you guys could even imagine. Right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I hope so. That's the goal.
Well, I wish we had time to tell everybody all about it, but we got to.
Well, when it comes out, we can come back and answer questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
How much can you tell me,
behind the
Todd?
scenes shit? I can tell you it's true crime, and it's the reason it's important and why it's being said that it's maybe a once in a several generation type project is it really rewrites history on some very big crimes and makes some connections and stuff that have not been made prior to this point through police or media or otherwise. And it wasn't like we were magicians and just pulled something out. We just took the time to keep digging, and we were looking at documents that everybody had and information everybody had, with the exception of a couple things where I think we were kind of the first to hear those. And your
personalities and your eyes and the way you ask questions and follow different curiosities led you to make connections that a lot of people haven't made. I'm telling you guys, I've been singing the praises of this story forever. He can tell you, I'm like, this show it's going to be crazy. You know what I mean? It's so good. So I'm really excited as it moves forward, how much you guys could talk to us about. And I'm excited by the God Hates Ann idea already. And then this one is just crazy good. So
I hope so.
Hopefully you come back and tell us, like, as it's going, what it is and how it's developing. And
yeah, I hope so. I mean,
that'd be awesome, right?
I'm pitching, you know what I mean? I'm in there fighting for this one, Yeah.
And I've been pitching to them we got to get these guys on to talk about this. It's already a show. They should be recording all the stuff they're doing now. And then, but there's that line between what you guys can record and what you can, because you have to sell it and it's sold or whatever. So such a.
Yeah.
It's been interesting for me. I can't wait for people to see it because I think it's going to be a movie. I think it's going to be a documentary. I think it's going to be a podcast. I think it's going to be a book. I think it's going to be a series. It's an incredible.
And
story.
hopefully some people get held accountable.
Yes.
Most importantly, right?
Yeah, well, I
hopefully
mean, I know
justice is served.
Seth's freaking out because we're over here. But in real life, I mean, the things that excite me about it are, yeah, it's going to rewrite history. And it is just a sheer fascinating story. And it still fascinates me every little bit that we uncover. But there is some, like, real life right now, if shit that might happen as far as, like,
Implications.
yeah.
People getting arrested.
Some people might get arrested and go to jail that should have been in jail 35 years ago. And then, and there also are a lot of people out there that were victims that Todd and I are pretty sure we know where they are.
So I'm just telling you guys that the whole time you guys have been telling me this story over the last, it's constantly like, what? Like, that's totally different than the thing last week, or like every show. It's like watching a Game of Thrones where the show just changes. Like, what? That's the thing too. Oh, you found the proof of that. There has to be a guy that's doing this. Well, there isn't. Like, now then he exists.
That's the pitch for the show right there. You doing that.
It's just wonderful. It's just this wonderful, like, no way. How did they miss that? That's so obvious. Like, it's
quite
so
the roller
exciting.
coaster. I mean, at one point we're down like, fuck this, I quit. Just fucking turn it over to the police. We're done. And then next thing we're fucking doing shots, high-fiving each other in my bar. Like, this is awesome, you know? So it's, I think it's going to come across that way when it gets put together and people see what this really is.
I hope so.
Well, I appreciate it.
It's been the coolest thing I've ever done, I think. Seriously. It's been the coolest thing I've ever done.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been incredible.
I can see and hear in your voice, like, the excitement of what you're going to, like, now you found a home and you're going to get to work on this.
Yeah. There is a giant leap going from, this is the coolest thing. I mean, Todd and I have put countless hours, 2.5 years of staying up until 5 a.m., you know, into this thing. Getting from there to it comes out on Hulu or Netflix or HBO's dead now, but you know what I mean? Going over that last hurdle, it has nothing to do with it could be the coolest show in the entire, I mean, Star Wars, you know, they didn't want to make that. They didn't want to make The Godfather.
You still haven't even come up on the hurdles yet. There's a whole nother group of craziness that's going to happen. This is going to be awesome.
From here to when the first episode premieres is a long ass journey, but I mean, I feel pretty confident about it.
Cool. All right, man. Well, thanks, dude. Thanks for doing the whole podcast on the thing. This is the first one that's been like the whole podcast of just talking to somebody.
I like it. It's a good setup you got there. It looks all legit.
Yeah, man. These guys are incredible, dude. We got the studio.
Right.
We got the business guys behind. It's going to be good. We're building.
Yeah.
Eric Trunda here. Do you guys know each other, Eric?
No, we've never met. No,
Yeah.
It's good to meet you, man.
Yeah, Eric's.
Nice to meet you, buddy.
The studio.
Tom's got all the books around him. He's got to look smart because when he talks, it fucks up the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are those fake books like you find in those
Yes.
staging
Yeah, look at that.
stores or whatever?
No, I've read every one of these books, dude.
Look at that.
Not those. Those are for Kleenex.
It's a Kleenex box. It looks like books. I love it.
Yes. All right, dude. See ya.
I'll talk to you
meeting you.
later, Todd.
Later.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks,
See you
Todd.
guys.